Do you ever find yourself drifting back to the days of shag carpeting, tube socks, and Saturday morning cartoons? If you grew up in the 1970s, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It was a decade filled with bold fashion choices, iconic TV shows, and trends that are hard to forget. In this video, we'll be taking a trip down memory lane. If you were lucky enough to experience this colorful decade, you'll likely recognize these snapshots of life in the 70s. Walking into a 1970s home was like entering a kaleidoscope that would make today's minimalist decor seem, well, boring. Do you remember shag carpeting? Sure, it might have been hideous by today's standards, but there was something undeniably comforting about sinking your bare feet into those soft, fluffy strands. You could lie down on the living room floor, make angel patterns, and then roll over onto a couch that was probably covered in giant floral prints. And let's not forget about the furniture. Macrame plant holders, anyone? They were in every corner of the house, adding to the earthy vibe that was a big deal in the 70s. Speaking of earthy, how could we forget the avocado green kitchen appliances, or the harvest gold refrigerators? Those colors defined our kitchens, and whether you loved or hated them, you couldn't escape them. If you were lucky, your kitchen had a rotary phone mounted on the wall, with a cord so long that it practically let you walk around the entire house while chatting. The fashion of the 1970s was a whole experience. There were trends that you either embraced wholeheartedly or tried to avoid. Take the leisure suit, a polyester ensemble that men wore for both casual and semi-formal occasions. It usually came in shades of brown, baby blue, or even mint green. It was paired with platform shoes that could easily add an extra inch or two of height. Seeing grown men strut around in those outfits was like watching a disco ball come to life. Speaking of fashion staples, tube socks were practically the unofficial uniform of gym class. If your socks didn't reach your knees, were you even trying? You could easily pair it with short shorts or your favorite sneakers. These brightly striped socks were a must-have for both boys and girls. For hair, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing someone rocking a bowl cut or feathered hair. The bowl cut was exactly what it sounded like. Your mom plopped a bowl over your head and cut along the edge, giving you that unmistakable round look. It was all the rage for boys, especially if they wanted to look like Adam Rich from 8 is Enough. And for the girls, feathered hair, a la Farrah Fawcett. You'd spend ages trying to perfect those soft, voluminous waves that framed your face just right. Of course, no 70s outfit was complete without a mood ring. Because why wouldn't you want your ring to tell the world how you're feeling? The stones changed colors based on your body temperature, letting everyone know around you how good or bad a time you were having. If you were feeling particularly stylish, you might throw on a pair of bell-bottoms along with your ring and head out the door channeling your inner rock star. The 70s were a time when fashion was all about self-expression, and nobody did it quite like this decade. If you were a kid in the 1970s, your toy collection probably looked a little different from what kids have today. There were no touchscreens, no online multiplayer games, just good old-fashioned fun. One of the most iconic toys of the decade? Clackers. These two acrylic balls attached to a string were meant to be smashed together to create a loud clacking sound. The harder you clacked, the better, until of course they shattered into pieces. Turns out they were more dangerous than fun, which is probably why they got banned. But while they lasted, clackers were the ultimate playground toy. Then came the pet rock. Yeah, that's right, a rock. You paid money for a rock, gave it googly eyes, and pretended it was a real pet. You could feed it, walk it, and it never made a mess. Sounds silly now, but back then, it was all the rage. For $4, you had yourself a low-maintenance pet. If you wanted something a little more active, Stretch Armstrong was the way to go. This super stretchy, muscle-bound toy could be pulled, twisted, and yanked in all directions, only to snap back into shape. The thrill of seeing how far you could stretch his arms before you felt like he might actually tear apart. Spoiler, it was pretty hard to break him. But it wasn't just toys that made childhood in the 70s fun. Your bedroom was your sanctuary, and it had to be decked out with the right accessories. You had your trusty lava lamp on your nightstand, casting colorful glows while you listened to your favorite music. And let's not forget the posters. Whether it was Jimi Hendrix or a scene from Star Wars, your walls were plastered with your favorite icons. You might have even had a beanbag chair for lounging as you flipped through the latest issue of Dynamite magazine, keeping up with all the pop culture news. And then, of course, came the dawn of the video game. Pong, the simple two-dimensional tennis game, was revolutionary when it was released in 1972. It was basic by today's standards, a white dot bouncing back and forth between two paddles, but it was the first glimpse into a future where video games would become a major part of childhood. Later in the decades, games like Space Invaders took it to a whole new level, letting you blast away at alien ships while standing at an arcade machine for hours. The toys and trends of the 1970s were all about fun, creativity, and a little bit of chaos. Whether you were playing outside with friends or hanging out in your bedroom, there was never a dull moment. Saturday mornings in the 1970s were sacred. The moment you woke up, you'd rush to the TV with a bowl of sugary cereal in hand to catch your favorite cartoons. The lineup was unbeatable. Scooby-Doo, the Pink Panther, Fat Albert, and of course, Schoolhouse Rock. Those catchy songs taught you everything from grammar to how a bill becomes a law. Conjunction Junction, What's Your Function? Is probably still stuck in your head to this day. Saturday mornings were magical because they gave kids a perfect world, one with animated adventures and life lessons all before noon. But cartoons weren't the only thing that kept us glued to the screen. Primetime television in the 1970s was something the whole family could enjoy together. Shows like Happy Days brought the 1950s back in style, with Richie Cunningham and the Fonz. Everyone knew that when Fonzie hit the jukebox with his fist, the music would start playing. It was pure TV magic. For a bit of action, there was The $6 Million Man, where Steve Austin, a former astronaut with bionic implants, used his superhuman abilities to save the day. And let's not forget Charlie's Angels, where three stylish women fought crime and took over primetime with their tough yet glamorous personas. Whether it was the wholesome laughs of the Brady Bunch or the gritty action of Starsky and Hutch, there was something for everyone in the 70s. Late-night TV was a bit of a different story. If you were lucky enough to stay up past your bedtime, you might have caught the very first episodes of Saturday Night Live, with the likes of John Belushi, Chevy Chase, and Gilda Radner, making you laugh until your sides hurt. The sketches were cheeky, edgy, and completely different from anything that had been on TV before. If you stayed up even later, you'd eventually hit that dreaded test card, the one with the color bars that let you know the TV was done for the night. No 24-hour programming back then. Once midnight hit, it was time for bed. The 1970s were all about music. Whether you're spinning records in your bedroom or catching a live performance on TV, music was everywhere, and it was as diverse as it was influential. Disco dominated the dance floors, and if you were brave enough to hit an actual disco, you knew the beats of KC and the Sunshine Band, the Bee Gees, and Donna Summer by heart. The era of disco wasn't just about the music, it was a whole vibe. The flashy outfits, the shiny disco balls, and the pulsating dance moves were all part of the scene. Roller discos became a thing too, where you could strap on a pair of skates, throw on some shiny threads, and groove to the sound of "The Freak" by Chic as the lights flashed around you. But disco wasn't for everyone. If you were more into rock, the 70s had you covered too. Bands like Kiss and Lynyrd Skynyrd offered a rebellious alternative to the disco craze. Kiss's larger-than-life personas, with their wild makeup and explosive performances, made them one of the most iconic rock bands of the decade. Meanwhile, Lynyrd Skynyrd brought a southern rock sound to the table, with anthems like Freebird that still play at every concert's encore to this day. If you wanted to catch your favorite bands live but couldn't make it to the concert, Soul Train and the Midnight Special were must-watch TV shows. Soul Train brought soul, R&B, and funk to living rooms across America, with legendary performers like Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin gracing the stage. The dancers were as much as part of the show as the music, and everyone had their favorite Soul Train line dance to try and mimic. The Midnight Special, on the other hand, catered to rock fans and aired late on Friday nights after The Tonight Show. If you stayed up late enough, you'd catch performances from the likes of Led Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, and David Bowie, all in their prime. In the 1970s, going to the movies wasn't just an afternoon activity. It was an event. Blockbuster culture as we know it was born in this decade. And no movie did that better than Jaws, Released in the summer of 1975, Jaws changed the way we thought about the ocean forever. Who could forget that terrifying dud-dum, dud-dum of the shark's terrifying theme as it stalked swimmers from below? It was one of the first films to create mass hysteria at the box office, and it practically invented the concept of the summer blockbuster. People lined up around the block to see it, and once they did, many were too scared to get back in the water. But it wasn't just sharks that captured audiences' imaginations. In 1977, Star Wars hit the big screen, and nothing would ever be the same again. George Lucas's space epic brought groundbreaking special effects and a story that completely immersed you in a galaxy far, far away. Kids everywhere became obsessed with lightsabers, X-Wing fighters, and stormtroopers. If you saw Star Wars in theaters, you probably still remember the awe you felt as the opening crawl rolled up the screen. And the unmistakable John Williams score blasted through the speakers. And once the toys hit the shelves, kids were begging their parents for action figures, spaceships, and anything with the Star Wars logo on it. If you were in the mood for something a little scarier, the 70s delivered that too. Horror films went mainstream with movies like The Exorcist and Halloween. Watching The Exorcist was an experience you didn't easily forget. People fainted in theaters, and some even walked out because it was just too intense. Meanwhile, Halloween introduced us to Michael Myers and set the standard for slasher films to come. These movies weren't just about cheap thrills, they left a lasting impression, making you think twice before turning off the lights at night. If you went to school in the 1970s, you probably remember hauling around your metal lunchbox, one that was proudly decorated with your favorite cartoon characters, superheroes, or even a movie star. Scooby-Doo, Star Wars, and the $6 Million Man lunchboxes were especially popular. But regardless of who was on the outside, the inside usually held the same classic lunchtime staples: bologna sandwich, a bag of chips, and perhaps a thermos filled with some Kool-Aid or milk. That matching thermos was a must, complete with a cup that doubled as a lid. Every day, you'd carry your lunchbox like it was a badge of honor, and maybe even trade your goodies with a friend in the cafeteria. When the school day ended, you'd head home for a snack. There was nothing quite like the after-school treats of the 70s. Hamburger Helper was a go-to for dinner, with its easy-to-make, one-pan meal that parents loved just as much as kids. If you were lucky, you might even get a Jell-O dessert. And of course, there was always a packet of Kool-Aid waiting to be mixed with way too much sugar. The simplicity of school days and after-school snacks in the 1970s is something that still brings a smile to everyone's face. It was a time when lunch boxes were strong, gym class was a mix of fun and competition, and dinner was often straight from a box. But that didn't matter. It was all part of growing up in the 70s. While the 1970s had its share of fun, the decade was also shaped by significant world events that even kids couldn't ignore. Every evening the news would come on, and three big stories dominated the headlines: the Vietnam War, Watergate, and the oil crisis. If you were a kid in the 70s, you probably didn't fully understand what was going on, but you knew enough to know it was serious. The Vietnam War was winding down by the mid-1970s, but every night there were stories about soldiers coming home, protests, and the toll the war had taken on the country. It was a constant presence, even if you were more focused on your schoolwork or TV shows. Then came Watergate. This political scandal shook the nation and eventually led to President Richard Nixon's resignation in 1974. For many families, it was the first time they saw a president leave office in disgrace. The image of Nixon boarding that helicopter, waving as he left the White House for the last time. It was one that seared into the minds of anyone who watched the news back then. Amidst all of this, though, there were moments of celebration too, like America's bicentennial in 1976. The 200th anniversary of the United States brought out parades, fireworks, and a renewed sense of patriotism. Everything was red, white, and blue, from flags waving in the streets to special commemorative coins and stamps. It was a year-long party, and even kids got swept up in the excitement, proudly sporting their bicentennial gear. So if you grew up in the 1970s, you remember all of this. You remember the fads, the fun, the challenges, and the triumphs. It's more than just nostalgia. It's part of who you are. While the trends may have faded, the memories will always stick around. Which of these memories are your favorites? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.